Hey guys, welcome to BP, the Bible Perspective. Why does the Bible permit slavery, both in the Old and New Testaments? Now, before we get into it, please like and share this video and subscribe to BP, the Bible Perspective. And as always, if you have a thought, a comment, add it to the comments section below. All comments are welcome. You know, this is one of the most troubling subjects in the entire Bible, slavery. Especially when we consider the American slavery and how the Christians were involved and how even America used the Bible to justify American slavery. Now, of course, they used it in the wrong way, but the problem was when you read the Bible, they're not wrong in the sense of saying that slavery was not only justified by God, but regulated. So how do we deal with this as believers? How do we reckon with this? And as you can see, as an African American, how even more do I reckon with this issue of slavery being permitted in the New Testament and the Old Testament. Now understand that slavery has been a part of the human condition since the fall of Adam. In other words, man in his sinful state enslaved people. And there were different forms of slavery. This is why sometimes in the arguments, some conservatives would try to justify slavery or kind of dismiss it. They basically tried to say, well, there are different kinds of slavery, like servitude slavery. Now, while that's true, that doesn't begin to justify the chattel slavery, owning people, taking away their rights and making them your property. And even the servitude slavery was not moral. But here's the point. If the way the sinful nature handled slavery is, well, if you were weak, you were a slave. If your nation, city, culture got conquered, you were a slave. You had no rights. You had no appeals or anything. You were property to be treated with as the owners please. Okay, so that's fine, right? For the non-believer, the ungodly. But here's the problem. When Israel became a nation, and one of the main issues, many of the main points that God made was that Israel was created to be a holy nation, that is, a separate nation apart from the world. And yet we see in the law of Moses that God not only permitted slavery, but he regulated it. Now let me read this from Leviticus. Now there are a few more verses in the Old Testament, so I'm just going to give you the gist of it. Here it is in Leviticus chapter 25. I'll start reading verse 44. Your male and female slaves are to be from the nations around you. You may purchase male and female slaves. Right? Now, even though he is saying that don't purchase Israelites, he's still saying, but you can purchase non-Israelites. Right? Kind of problematic. Verse 45. You may also purchase them from foreigners staying with you, or from their families living among you, those born in your land. These may become your property. You may leave them to your sons after you to inherit as property. You can make them slaves for life. But concerning your brothers, the Israelites, you must not rule over one another harshly. Now, he goes on, that's the kind of the gist of it, right? In other words, he does give laws when a person becomes more like a domestic slave. and indentured slaves. In other words, if you couldn't pay your debts off, if you owed someone, you could go into indentured servant. Of course, what he's talking about when it came to foreigners, full-blown slavery. They had no rights. In other words, God don't care about them. So what's up with that, right? Now, I have to say, when it comes to the Old Testament, this is troubling to me, but I can't give an answer. In other words, here is an example where God could have said, Israel, for you, no slavery. You're going to be better than the other nations. And yet he allowed them to buy and own and purchase and leave them to their children for inheritance. Human beings. Now, why is that? I can't answer that because the Bible doesn't give us the answer. I just don't know. The other question would be then, does that mean God is unjust? Does it mean that we can kind of wave our finger in the fist of God and say, you're unfair? Well, here's the thing about that. One day we will stand before God and you'll get your chance to do that. I will say this about any kind of accusations about God in terms of trying to impugn his integrity or his justice. You don't have all the facts. Secondly, God is sovereign to do as he's pleased. Now, while that may sound like a cop-out to some, that's the best I can give. In other words, God can do as he pleased. So the bigger question is, does it mean that he is unjust for doing it? Well, when you're the king, how do you measure that? You can't. What I will say is, we don't have all the answers to be able to declare God unjust. That's why I say the biggest thing is I just don't know. I can't give you an answer as to why God allows this kind of slavery, and this slavery is just as bad. This slavery is no different than the American slavery. The only difference between American slavery and every other kind of slavery is American slavery targeted race, a particular race. But everything else is just as bad. You own people, and you could do with people as you please if they were your slaves. Now, I can say this, that when we come to the New Testament, that the New Testament had a different approach to slavery. And so I want to read 1 Peter chapter 2 and a portion of 1 Peter chapter 3, because this is going to give us the context and it'll give us a greater meaning as far as the New Testament is concerned. Why? Because in the New Testament, when you make a statement, God so loved the world, that's a different context. But yet, we see over and over again that the Christian slaves were told to obey their masters. So why is that? How, as Christians, when we are free in Jesus, we are sons of God. We have an inheritance. We're heirs of God and joint heirs with Christ. So how do we come to the place of saying that if I am an heir of God, a joint heir with Christ, how is it that now I'm allowed to be a slave? And even Christian could own slaves. But let me give you an example of this, and I'm going to tell you why I think in the New Testament is certainly a different reason and purpose. So this is 1 Peter chapter 2, and he says, "Dear friends, I urge you as strangers and temporary residents to abstain from fleshly desires that war against you." The first thing I want you to point out here is that he says he's saying you are strangers and pilgrims, meaning that we're just passing through. This is not our permanent home. It's not our permanent place. So in other words, we have a purpose then while we're here, since this is not our permanent home. Very important. For further reference, go back to Matthew chapter 5, and you will see Peter kind of echoing the same words of Jesus. We'll see this in a moment. So he says, verse 12, conduct yourselves honorably among the Gentiles, so that in the case where they speak against you as those who do what is evil, they will, by observing your good works, glorify God on the day of visitation. Now this is something you see in Matthew chapter 5 when Jesus said, let your light shine before men, that they may what? See your good works and glorify God. Now right there we come to a purpose. In other words, the purpose for believers being in the world is to showcase something, show something. In other words, let our light shine. The purpose of letting the light shine is to cast light on those in darkness. But watch carefully what he says. They're able to watch us. They're able to see us. This is the issue here. They're able to see us. So let's go back now. Verse 12 again, conduct yourselves honorably among the Gentiles, so that in the case where they speak evil against you, as those that do what is evil, they will, by observing your good works, glorify God in the day of visitation. In other words, people may speak evil against you. They may say all kinds of lies and stuff against you. But Peter is saying this, but based upon what they see, and they will not and cannot argue against what they see. And so he's saying, show them something. But now, how do we do that? Look at the next verse. Verse 13. Submit to every human authority because of the Lord, whether to the emperor as to supreme authority, or to governors as those sent by him to punish those who do what is evil, and the praise of those who do what is good. For it is God's will that you silence the ignorance of the foolish people by doing good. That's how you counteract the evil against you. As God's slaves, live as free people, but do not use your freedom as a way to conceal evil. Honor everyone, love the brotherhood, fear God, honor the emperor. Now why am I saying this? Notice he said submit. Right there we see one of the tools that God is going to use in order to get people to observe us. One of the tools is submission. So now we see the submission becomes a greater tool now, not just for wives. We get to the wives in a minute, but understand why he's saying this. It puts us in a position for people to see. Now, as we can see, he's going to give 3 examples of how we exist in the culture. Government, slaves, and wives. They all have this in common. Now, we all share and submit to the government. Then he goes to talk about slaves, and I'll get to that in a moment. The reason I want to point it out is that the slaves, whether it's the government, the slaves, and the wives, we are put in positions where people observe our good manner of life, our godly life. So right there, that is why God allows that evil. People see us. You know, we sometimes rejoice when an evangelist comes to town and they fill up one of the big domes. 100,000 people crowd into the domes. But yet in those cities, and mostly in major cities, that's only but a fraction of the people. What about the other people, the millions of people around the metropolitan area? Well, you live there. I live there. We live there. This is what he's talking about. Those famous evangelist would never come to your park, your supervisor, your job. Supermarket, I meant to say. Your job, right? Your neighborhood. But you're there. And sometimes we are there in situations where, and thank God, for example, in our common day, slavery in and of itself is not the issue. But we work, our employment, sometimes our wives, sometimes the government, how we interact in the government. He says, what you show them is what they see. And God leaves us in positions to oftentimes showcase his life. All right, so look at verse 18. Household slaves, submit without fear to your masters, not only to the good and the gentle, but also to the cruel. For it brings favor if, mindful of God's will, someone endures grief for suffering unjustly. For what credit is there if you sin and are punished and you endure? But if you do what is good and you suffer, it will endure. If you endure, this will bring favor with God. For you were called to this, because Christ also suffered for you, leaving you an example, so that you should follow in his steps. He did not commit sin, and nor was deceit found in his mouth. Now I want to stop, because notice he brings in Jesus' life as an example. And you see that even when you go back and you read the gospel, where the soldiers looked up and said this was the Son of God. He was able to come to that conclusion by what he saw. But understand the slave part, right? Now, slavery, especially during this day, was a common thing, especially in the Roman Empire. It was stayed up to even anywhere from 2/3, as high as 2/3 could have been slave. Or maybe, but anyway, slavery was a natural part. So when the person became a Christian, right, they might have had the same thoughts we would have today. Like, what's up for me being a slave? In fact, let me just say this. We're not going to get into it now, but read the book of Philemon. That's a very interesting book, because that is Paul writing to a Christian slave master about one of his runaway slaves. Here's the point. Whatever we find ourselves in, God wants us to showcase this life. Look at this from 1 Peter chapter 3. In the same way, wives, submit yourselves to your own husbands, so that even if they do not, even if they disobey the Christian message, they may be won over without any message by the way their life lives. When they observe your pure, reverent lives, your beauty should not consist of outward things like elaborate hairstyles and the wearing of gold ornaments or fine clothes. Instead, it should consist of what is inside the heart, with an imperishable quality of a gentle, quiet spirit, which is very valuable in God's eyes. For in past times, holy women, to put their hope in God, also beautified themselves in this way, submitting to their own husband, just as Sarah obeyed Abraham, calling him Lord, and you become her children when you do what is good and are not frightened by any alarm. You will take note that, by the way, that when Sarah did submit to Abraham, Abraham also submitted to Sarah in the incident with Hagar. And not only did he submit, but God also told Abraham to submit to his wife. The biggest issue here is, he said, it's how you look. Now, he's not talking about looking nice, not telling you not to go to the beauty parlor and all that kind of stuff. What he's saying is that what is more important is what you put on the inside. That's what people will see. They will watch your lifestyle. They will watch you. That's what they will see. Now, so in the New Testament, slavery takes upon a different purpose, and one I'm more easily to answer. And that is that it takes on the purpose that God places us and positioned to showcase His grace in our lives, that they may see. The Old Testament, I can say I can't answer. But the New Testament, we get a clearer picture. So look, hope that helped. That is my perspective. Love to hear what you have to think and your thoughts on this. Add it to the comments section below, and don't forget to like and share this video and subscribe to BP the Bible Perspective. And as always, if you have a thought or comment, add it to the comments section below. All comments are welcome. Till next time, I'll see you then.